The province of Ontario entered a new era of health and safety prevention in 1978, when the legislature passed the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The Act, often referred to as the Green Book, is a familiar sight in Ontario workplaces. There are actually many other Green Books. Some contain the regulations for mining, construction, industrial, and healthcare facilities. Others contain specific regulations for designated substances, such as asbestos, or even individual jobs, such as window cleaning. The passage of the Act gave workers the basic rights they needed to protect themselves from injury, illness, or death on the job. Before that, the only real rights they had were those they negotiated through collective bargaining. The stronger unions were able to implement joint health and safety committees, so workers would have an ongoing voice, not just at bargaining time. But the majority of Ontario workers were forced to rely on employers to implement health and safety programs. The Act came into being after a major public campaign by unions and their political friends in Ontario. Deaths on construction sites, in mines and manufacturing plants fueled the anger. Added to it was increasing evidence of occupational disease among asbestos and uranium workers. A wildcat strike in Elliott Lake led to a special royal commission and resulted in passage of the Health and Safety Act. It puts in place what is now known as the Internal Responsibility System, which, at least in theory, gives the workplace parties the tools to solve their own health and safety problems. It empowered workers to take responsibility for their own well-being by providing them with three basic rights: the right to participate in controlling health and safety hazards, the right to know about hazards in the workplace, and the right to refuse unsafe work. The experience of more than 2 decades have taught workers that the words in the Green Book on their own don't do much good. Many employers simply ignore the three rights. Others comply with the letter but not the spirit of the law. And the government has done little to enforce the regulations. This means that workers must fully understand their rights and take the initiative to make sure they are respected. Under the Act, workers have equal representation on joint health and safety committees. In smaller workplaces, where joint committees are not mandatory, they have the right to appoint a health and safety representative. The Joint Committee is the backbone of the internal responsibility system. Worker representatives participate in regular workplace inspections as well as accident investigations. They have the right to be present at the beginning of testing, and they can participate in the design of hazard controls and the development of training programs. These rights are extended to individual workers through the legal duty of joint committees to communicate with them and act on their behalf. To make sure workers know about these rights, the employer must post a copy of the Act, as well as explanatory material from the Ministry of Labor. Workers often have to assert their right to participate in the face of employer resistance. Employers are required by law to respond in writing to joint committee recommendations. But because of their concerns about costs, they frequently refuse to take meaningful action. Worker representatives can call in a ministry inspector, but to get action, they must have a well-documented case. Margaret Saltern learned this the hard way when she discovered asbestos in the attic of an administration building at Brookside Detention Center. She had to keep pushing until she won the fight.
We had an emergency inspection of the area, and when I went up there, I found that it wasn't a little bit of insulation. It was mounds and mounds and mounds of loose, just thrown all over the floor insulation. So of course I brought it to our administrator's attention, and they said that they'd have their people come in and test the friability of the asbestos to see if indeed it was a concern. And of course it came back that no, it was fine.
Margaret and her co-workers couldn't believe it and called the Ministry of Labor, who sent out an inspector.
When he came in, he found that the whole area was contaminated with asbestos. Then there was an order put out that they had to do a massive cleanup. Most of the time we end up doing our inspections by ourselves because the committee members, management committee members, are not there, or they're too busy, or, so it's It's really too bad that we have to get to the point where you have to actually bring in an outside and order them to do something to fix it up when it's a real health-related issues, and it affects them as well as us.
The Act requires that workers be given the means to recognize hazardous materials or agents on the job. The right to know applies to biological, chemical, and physical agents, like noise and vibration. When dealing with chemical hazards, the Act incorporates regulations establishing the Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System, WHMIS. This system requires labels on containers of hazardous materials, as well as material safety data sheets, providing more detailed information and training on how to make more effective use of the system. The WHMIS regulations are very specific, and in most cases, there is little room for employer refusal to comply. Most disputes concern companies that claim that their chemical formulas are protected by trade secret exclusions in the regulations. As the steelworkers Peter Boyle describes, it takes vigilance on the part of workers and joint committees to identify instances of non-compliance and to make the system work effectively.
Well, the way workers get the information is through material safety data sheets, through training, and through workplace labels. And through labels, they understand what chemicals they have, they know what they're working with. They can be alerted to the hazards of the chemical and go and check a material safety data sheet to find out how it further affects them, what the health effects are, what the synergistic effects are, for instance, and what other effects it has to chemicals around them or other people around them. And training is a big part. That lays down a framework, a minimum standard in the workplace of training so that workers can understand what the labels are, how to read them, how to read take a material safety data sheet and take the information off it that they need to protect themselves in the workplace. The system of labeling in a MSDS is not foolproof in the workplace. It doesn't always work. There's slip-ups, there's mistakes, and there's glitches. We've had situations where chemicals will come in and the MSDSs aren't there. And if people don't know that they have the right to know about that chemical and know how it affects you and if it affects you, how to protect yourself from the harmful effects of it, then they will be exposed, and that will cause problems in the future in most cases with harmful chemicals. The Joint Health and Safety Committee is really one of the safeguards of the whole system. They look at the system, they ensure that material safety data sheets are kept up to date, they ensure that they're there, that the workers know about it, and that the workers can protect themselves with it.
The Act gives individual workers a limited right to refuse unsafe work. This is a two-stage process. In the first stage, the worker has the right to refuse based on nothing more than the subjective belief that circumstances exist that are likely to endanger the worker or other workers. Once a worker exercises this right, the supervisor must investigate in the presence of the worker and a designated worker representative. If the supervisor agrees that a danger exists, corrective action is taken and the worker can return to the job. If there is no agreement, a Ministry of Labor inspector must be called in. But in most cases, it's the worker who spots the hazard and initiates this process. March 24, 2004. Jordan Borg is working the chassis line at the GM plant in Oshawa when he detects a burning smell coming from the multi-gun he's using. Within minutes, his body reacts to the strong fumes.
So all this vaporized oil was actually blowing at us, and it was burnt, and we didn't know what was going on. I got rashes along my neck. The other guys their arms were all itchy and scratchy. One guy had actually trouble breathing. He had to go in air in a nurse's office and get oxygen from a tank.
Jordan took action right away. He knew he had the right to refuse, and he and his co-workers exercised that right.
The second we started smelling that the gun was actually emitting this really strong odor, we stepped off the job right there. We refused to work. We called management, we called the group leader, told them that the circumstances, what were going on.
When management pressured them to return to their work, Jordan and his co-workers stood their ground.
I'm not going to lie, there was a bit of pressure. Management was pressuring us to go back to work at the time. They were losing jobs. It's their job to get us to go back to work, but we just stood up and said, no, this is not right. We're not going back, and the union backed us all the way.
The internal responsibility system was originally designed as part of a broader prevention system that would also include rigorous enforcement of regulations by the Ministry of Labor. When there is a lax enforcement, the system breaks down. It is up to us, the workers who face the hazards on the job, to insist on compliance of the law and to call in a ministry inspector when one is needed. The Green Book gives employers a general duty to provide workers with a safe and healthy workplace. This happens most effectively when we know our rights and have the collective ability to act on them.
We don't stand up for ourselves. Who's going to stand up? We all have to act as a group. We have to work together. And if we don't, then you just crumble.
The more knowledgeable you are on the issues, the more firepower you have with the person you're trying to deal with that's against it.
Well, the law gives the workers the right to know, but the workers have to know that they have that right, and they have to know how to use it in the workplace.